a young perspective on hot-button issues around the world. This is The Hub.
President Donald Trump of the United States says he is, quote-unquote, very seriously considering a military option against Iran. Now, this happens against the backdrop where the U.S. State Department has issued a security alert on Monday urging all United States citizens to leave Tehran immediately. As tensions continue to escalate, of course, President Donald Trump has also announced that any country doing business with Iran will face a 25% tariff. That is the trade relations doing trade with the United States. Now, in a move aimed at increasing pressure on Tehran in recent days, developments in Venezuela has also been escalating, carrying out a military option, codenamed Operation Absolute Resolve, that is against Caracas. We've heard from the Vice President of Venezuela, who has just been sworn in as the acting leader of Venezuela. We've also heard from the son of President Nicolas Maduro Guela, urging calm of the situation, saying that he will be standing by his father and standing by the acting president, Jose Rodriguez of Venezuela. So, what will happen to Iran? Is a war against Tehran imminent? From Caracas to Iran, tensions are escalating on multiple fronts. To explore all these questions and more, we're very pleased to have with us today in Shanghai, China, by Linjie Cho Zanadu, Professor of International Relations at the European Center for Peace and Development. Also in Washington, D.C., we have Anton Verdianshin, Associate Professor at the American University, joining us from Washington. And also in Shanghai, China, we have Professor Jiang Shixue, Director of the Center for Latin American Studies at Shanghai University. Now, Professor Jiang, let me turn to you first. A threat of a military option against Tehran, and on top of that, 25% tariff effective immediately against any trading partner doing business with Iran. What do you make of these latest announcements? What will happen? I mean, is a war, is a military strike by Washington against Tehran imminent? Is Iran next?
Well, for the time being, I would point out that the world will not be surprised if the U.S. takes any actions against other countries. No matter it's 20% rise for tariffs or military action against other countries, well, I will not be surprised. So it's really a pity that now we are in the year 2026. So people, the U.S. does not wish to respect the UN Charter. The U.S. does not wish to respect international law. So it's really a pity for the human being, for the mankind.
And then why do you think now? I mean, Donald Trump has never been a big fan of Iran, which is a sworn rival of Israel, a staunch ally of the United States, for whom the Trumps, himself and his family have been standing by very firmly since Trump 1.0 back in 2018, 2019. But why a military option now announced by President Trump against Tehran?
The country, Iran, has been considered as an enemy by the U.S. for so many decades. And don't forget that the U.S. has won a kind of victory with quotation mark against Venezuela. So I believe that Trump want to use military action to overthrow the government of Iran, probably with the help from Israel, or probably. So I believe that it is more likely that the U.S. this time will take military action against one more sovereign state in the Middle East.
Now, Anton, in Washington, let me turn to you. How do you see the factors coming into play that is driving President Trump's announcement of potentially attacking Iran next? Trump is saying, quote unquote, he's very seriously considering a military operation against Iran. Why do you think that's the case?
I think Donald Trump is feeling very confident after the operation to remove Nicolas Maduro from Venezuela went off surprisingly well from a purely operational, technical, military standpoint. Within one day, the Venezuelan president was essentially evacuated, kidnapped from the country. And Donald Trump, I'm afraid, is making a mistake that several of his predecessors have made, which is to mistake the technical operational aspect of a military campaign for a long-term process, and then to misjudge the difference between Venezuela, which is in the Western Hemisphere, close to the United States, and really had absolutely no allies to come to its defense, and then Iran, which is on the other side of the planet from the United States and does have allies with economic interests there, notably Russia and China. Donald Trump is following up on a long legacy in American foreign policy, which is its opposition to Iran broadly. Of course, we've seen exceptions to this, such as the Obama administration negotiating the JCPOA with Iran. But with Donald Trump, it is narcissism and his desire to project power to the rest of the planet that seems to be driving his foreign policy decisions. There doesn't seem to be any overarching plan, but there does seem to be a very distant overarching goal for Trump, and that is a showdown with China. Because a lot of people in the Trump administration, supported by the American neocons, consider China an existential threat. And so everything that we've seen so far, the Venezuelan operation, the proxy war in Ukraine, from Trump's point of view, these are all signals to China that the United States is powerful enough to come and to challenge Beijing openly and globally. Whether that will work is an open question. Frankly, I doubt it. But for Trump, who values projection of power above everything else, this seems to be the modus operandi right now.
Now, Professor Fedianchin, let me follow up with you very quickly. President Trump has been briefed, according to reports, on military options against Iran. Is it conceivable that he's using another pretext, such as anti-terrorism, to take out the regime or members of the government in Tehran in the foreseeable future? I mean, what is the atmosphere like in Washington right now?
The atmosphere among the neoconservatives with whom Trump has surrounded himself and who are currently the most vocal members within and just around his administration. I'm speaking about people such as Lindsey Graham, for example, the senator from South Carolina, who has been vocally supporting military campaigns across all specters and against all perceived enemies of the United States. The neocons have really gotten their claws into Donald Trump, who, remember, was elected to office. Will be marking the year anniversary in about 7 days from now, as a matter of fact. He got elected into office by staying out of wars. But the neocons are pushing him towards them. And so, yes, I think it is very likely that there will be a military operation against Iran. The question is, what kind will it be? Most likely bombing, because the U.S. simply does not have the resources to put boots on the ground. And that leads me to the next big question, which is exactly what will be the purpose of the operation. Regime change seems to be on the cards. But exfiltrating a leader is simply not in the cards the way the U.S. did with Venezuela. Moreover, the Iranian government has demonstrated over the past year of dealing with domestic discontent that it is a lot more firmly in power than Nicolas Maduro personally was. Although even in Venezuela, his government is still actually in charge. But a military operation is by no means out of the question with the help of Israel, with the hopes of regime change. Unfortunately, I'm afraid that will create even more powerful blowback than the operation against Maduro has in Latin America.
Yeah, I mean, the domestic situations, the discontent and everything, stoking of discontent by, the greater powers are under scrutiny right now. Now, Professor Cho, let me ask you about this, because Donald Trump announced that any country doing business with Iran will face a 25% tariff effective immediately. And this executive order coming from Trump himself will be final and conclusive. What do you make of that? How will that work in reality? I mean, for example, what would that happen to China?
I think what's going on right now, the action against Tehran is also designed to abolish the Chinese asset in Iran, mainly in the oil trade, again, in this scenario. So this is just perhaps a way to revenge on the trade war, both China and the United States just had. And we know China is currently also doing the BRI investment in ports and logistic infrastructures in Iran. And the strategic move by the U.S., I'm very certain, is towards China. But beside the official demands, such as ending Iran's support to Hezbollah and so on, the purpose of a possible regime change is to place a U.S.-friendly puppet regime, basically, which will, again, have the U.S. to decide for its, natural resources and other economic outcomes.
You said avenging China for the China-U.S. Trade war, trade tensions, trade conflict, however you put it. I mean, why avenging that? Is it the rare earth control by China, enunciated by China against the U.S.? I mean, the U.S. has launched way more comprehensive trade and tech wars against China. If you think about chips, if you think about semiconductors, so on and so forth.
I mean, you have to look at larger pictures here. So basically, Trump is, saying that he wanted to be the boss, basically, for the entire Western Hemisphere. So I believe that's just the first step. The second step, once he has these skills to basically unite the entire West narratives, he's going to have this so-called, let's say, civilizational clash, like what Huntington has predicted before. But this time, it's not to spread democracy, but rather to, let's say, to have I put in a very straightforward way, a racialized international order based on not the traditional realism, but a racialized realism. So that's my prediction.
Just to clarify, is that what you're saying? A ritualized realism?
A racialized.
Explain that for us.
The white people dominate everything in the Western Hemisphere. Once he has secured that, it's going to be a clash of civilization between China and the rest of the Western world. So that's what he wants to do, I believe.
Racialized realism, that is very interesting term you have coined. Yes. I mean, transactional realism. There's so many ways to conceptualize what is going on right now, behind the curtains of the White House. We hope there can be another book written, such as Terry in the White House, written by former Pulitzer Prize-winning author. Now, let me ask you, Professor Jiang, about Greenland, Denmark. Let's make it clear, it is still under the sovereignty of Denmark, a territory that Trump threatened to take by force. President Donald Trump said the United States will acquire Greenland, Denmark, the hard way, and his quest for full ownership of Greenland is psychologically important to him. What could happen next?
Well, first of all, we want to point out a kind of a mistake made by Trump. He said that China and Russia are controlling Greenland. Well, that's not correct. Well, I want to point out that the U.S. just wants to take over Greenland because that piece of land is rich in natural resources, and also strategically speaking, that island is very, very important. So I want to say that probably the U.S. will take any actions to control this island, or by means of military, or by means of paying a certain amount of money to each citizen living in the island. So let's see what will happen.
Anton, do you think this is an empty threat against Greenland, Denmark? It is a non-starter because if you look at interviews, back-to-back interviews, street vox pops is conducted against the Danish living on the island of Greenland. I mean, they're categorically denying Trump's offer, giving them cash. They say that they're proud Danish Greenlanders living on the island. They will not accept any offer made by the United States.
Right. I don't think it's an empty threat at all. But the question of what kind of threat it is exactly depends entirely on Denmark and then on the Europeans behind Denmark. I think that Donald Trump is very serious about establishing de facto control over Greenland. Now, whether that comes through some kind of formal agreement with Denmark, where Denmark simply cedes Greenland to the United States without formalizing it, let's say, as, a 51st state or a territory such as Puerto Rico. This is difficult to say right now, but I think that would be the preferred option. If the Danes do not agree to this, then yes, I think the U.S. is perfectly capable of actually seizing it militarily, especially given that there will be absolutely no resistance there because the population of Greenland is negligible compared to the power that the United States can project within its own hemisphere. But here, NATO finds itself in a problematic position into which the Europeans have placed themselves. Donald Trump understands the power dynamic within NATO very clearly. And that dynamic is that NATO is the United States. And what the United States wants, NATO will do. The Europeans have demonstrated, especially during the Ukraine crisis over the past 4 years, that they will essentially do anything as long as the United States agrees to it. Look at the policy that the European countries have taken towards Ukraine. They are willing to place their troops there, for example, but only as long as the United States provides what they call a backstop. In other words, as long as the United States supports them. In other words, without the United States, NATO is incapable of making any sovereign and independent decisions. That's number one. And the other aspect of the whole NATO story, and remember the fact that that Greenland belongs to Denmark, which of course is a NATO member. The other side of the story is that the NATO members, the Europeans, have placed themselves in such a vassal-like relationship to the United States that they simply have no alternative. Even if the United States moves to seize Greenland, I don't think that it will actually affect NATO profoundly. It will be a scandal. The Europeans may rumble about it, but what exactly are they going to do? Where is Denmark going to go? Where are the Baltic countries going to go? They've made themselves fully dependent on the United States. There's a proxy war going on in Ukraine. What are they going to do? Leave NATO and run over to the Chinese or make an alliance with the Iranians or the Russians? None of that is realistic. So as shocked as we may be by Trump's naked realpolitik calculations in the question of Greenland, the Europeans placed themselves into a position of being taken advantage of by the United States. And until Europe decides to take matters into its own hand and to start behaving like an independent pole of power on our planet, the U.S., the Trump administration specifically, will simply run roughshod over the Europeans.
Very interesting analysis. Now, Professor Zhou, do you agree? I mean, because we've heard from the defense officials of NATO saying that NATO is Denmark, Denmark is NATO, and like Anton said, NATO is to some extent America as well. How do you see all these dynamics playing out? Is America destroying its own alliances with NATO by acquiring Denmark, acquiring Greenland to be specific?
I mean, one thing I believe people won't look at is the value system of President Trump himself. I mean, from the personal perspective. I'm not denying the strategic importance of Greenland, both geopolitically and in resource set. But, I'm saying something may shock you, but be prepared. Now, in December 10th, 2025, during a speech in Pennsylvania, Trump, for example, remarked, quote, let's have few people from Denmark. Do you mind send us few people from Denmark? Do you mind? But we always take people from the shithole countries, as he said, from Somalia and so on. So they're filthy and disgusting. So in this, also in his book, published, I think, in 1987, he talks about his grandfather, Frederick Trump, coming from Sweden as a child. So this whole Nordic narrative, I think, is something overshadowing Trump's, the racial narratives here. So Danes as Vikings can have Greenland, then Trump wants that too. So mythologically, Greenland is also called Thule. That is the mystical power of the land of the North. So once you dominate this narrative, you can be the king of the ultra whiteness in this kind of cultural symbolism. So I think that's his personal motivation to conquer the land of Vikings as well. So that's what he's doing actually at the moment.
Wow, interesting. Considering Trump's, being very proud of his, the fact that he also part of him hails from Western and even Northern Europe. Professor Jiang, let me ask you, how would you compare the strategic objectives of Trump when he announces war against Iran versus his threat of acquiring Greenland, Denmark? What are the differences and similarities when it comes to his geopolitical calculations, his calculations of interests against these very two different territories?
I would say that the only difference is related to the so-called defense. Iran probably can defend itself for a while because Iran has some kind of powerful weapons and also army soldiers. But for the island of Greenland, well, there are only some civilians and only the dogs, as Trump has said. So for Greenland, its defense is zero. So it will be very easy for the U.S. to take over Greenland. Well, you just don't need to send a very powerful military to the island. You just send some ships or airplanes to the island, and it will belong to the U.S. But for Iran, probably I would point out that it would be even more harder for the U.S. to conquer Iran compared with Venezuela. So let's see what will happen. The so-called common factor would be, again, the world will understand that in the age of the law of the jungle, the U.S. always believes that might is right. So this is terrible for the mankind. It's really a pity that the UN really can do nothing at all to stop the hegemony of the U.S. Personally, I'm quite pessimistic about the future of world peace.
Anton, let me ask you this final question. Now, do you think we're entering an era of unpredictable, temporary, ad hoc alliances, given the pattern and the nature of Donald Trump, whereby he has at least 3 more years to go?
I don't think it's going to be unpredictable. I think we are entering a period of global fragmentation. We are certainly entering a period when American hegemony is in relative decline. And I think that Donald Trump, by the way, is a manifestation. It's the extinction burst of American hegemony, of the unipolar moment. But what I think is more likely to start happening is that countries around the world will start banding together in order to protect themselves against the United States and against the West and whatever other outside actors there are. And we're already seeing this take place. We have the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, which I predict will become even more powerful and attractive to new members. And from the economic perspective, or rather in the economic field, I should say, we have the BRICS Plus. In other words, the world, the members of the global South, will start looking for alternatives to Western-dominated organizations, both economically and from the point of view of security. And unfortunately, if the United States continues to behave the way that it is under Donald Trump, the United States may end up on the receiving end of its own Cold War strategy towards the Soviet Union and communism, which was known as containment, because I think that if the United States continues to be so unpredictable and aggressive, that the global South, at least, will start coming together into regional and then informal global organizations that will attempt to contain the United States and, by extension, its allies and partners within NATO. That will be a great loss, not only for the United States, but for the rest of the world, because the United States certainly has done a lot of good for our planet when it chose to do so. Unfortunately, right now, doesn't seem to be a presidential term when it's still committed to the values that it itself expounds so vocally across the whole planet.
Thank you all so much for your insights. And that will do it for this edition of The Hub on CGTN. I'm Wang Guan in Beijing.